Hi everybody, welcome in. Welcome in. Welcome in, girlies! I want to find out more about the Scotichronicon today, because quite frankly I'm raging. Raging in all my puff. In all my years growing up in Scotland and going through the hellscape that is the Scottish education system, I was never once told about this incredibly cool, historic Scottish document about my own country. Other Scottish folk out there, have you heard of this? Is it just my school, my cité? Am I the drama? Is it me?
Am I the drama? I don't think I'm the drama.
Anyway, thinking caps on, troops. Hit subscribe and let's learn about the Scotichronicon together. Can you hear her barking? She's barking. Why are you barking? Me too, girlie, me too. First off, we have to talk a bit about the guy who actually wrote the goddamn thing. And his name was Walter Bauer, who lived from 1385 till about 1449. Common Era. Anno Domini, whatever you want to call it. Walter Bauer bears no relation to Jamie Bauer from what I can tell. As far as I know. You'll have to ask him though, I'm not sure.
That man just licked my nasal cavity. Uninvited.
And he was born in Haddington. Shout out to my Haddington followers. I know that there's some of you. But he left Haddington to go off and train with the Augustinian canons based out at St Andrews. At the time, obviously, study was centred very much around religion, so he studied theology and canon law. Don't know what that is, but he studied it. So he studied essentially at St Andrews Uni, which was founded in 1413, and he was one of the first graduates to study at Scotland's first ever university. How cool is that? And he became abbot of Inchcolm Abbey on Inchcolm Island in 1417. I nearly said 1714. Scratch that, reverse it. 1417. I just did a video all about Inchcolm Island, if you'd like to go and watch it. That's the reason why I'm now here talking to you about the Scotichronicon today. And he remained at Inchcolm as the abbot until his death in 1449. For a wee bit he did hop back and forth to the mainland because he was actually in the King's Court Council, whatever you want to call it, for King James I of Scotland. Okay, from 1424 to 1437. And then after that, he was just like, nah, you're alright. I'm just going to stay on my wee island and write my wee book too. So after James I died and he sort of retired to the island, he was asked by the Laird of Rosyth, Sir David Stewart, who asked him to write his Scotichronicon, which he worked on for like 10 whole years up and until the day that he died. The Scotichronicon, say it 10 times fast by the way, I've had to train myself how to say it. The Scotichronicon is absolutely massive and splits into 16 books. Sir David Stewart, the Laird of Rosyth, wanted a sort of updated version and continuation of a previous work by a man called John of Fordun, which was called the Chronica Gentis Scotorum. More Latin. My little brain can't handle it. Chronicle of the early days of Scotland from the book of Genesis all the way up until the reign of David I of Scotland, after which John of Fordun died, so he couldn't keep writing, obviously. So our Walter revised John's original books and amalgamated that into his new history, and then continued to write and expand that history up and until their contemporary time. Mythical foundation of Scotland, all the way up and until the death of King James I of Scotland in 1437. So a good place to stop, you know, pretty contemporary. And our man, Walter, was in the court, in the council of James I, so he's pretty clued in to the goings on. Both John of Fordun and Walter Bauer consider themselves historian priests. A little bit of both, a little bit of dabbling. From what we can tell of what we know about each of the men, Walter was the more educated one, but a lot of modern historians tend to favour John. Don't really know why. Of course, writing history at their time being historian priests, it's very much a history through the eyes of Christ, for lack of a better term, through the lens of medieval Christian Scotland, which we're going to dive into in just a little moment. But the Scotichronicon overall is the most important piece of medieval Scottish literature that survives to this day, even if it's not the most historically accurate thing you've ever read in your life. What if I told you that the mythical biblical origin of Scotland links back to ancient Egypt? This is where the Scotichronicon starts. Apologies in advance, by the way, if this starts to sound like some sort of Ancient Aliens plot. It's not. This was legitimately believed until like the 18th century. This is a real thing. It's a classic case of a group of people, a nation, looking for legitimacy and importance within the growing religious culture of the time, which of course was good old Christianity. But anyway, according to the Scotichronicon, this is how Scotland came to be. Don't laugh, okay? And we'll assess the truth behind it after, alright? It starts with Princess Scota, the daughter of an Egyptian pharaoh, and her husband, a Greek king called Gaethalus, otherwise named Goidel-Glass. I think I'm saying that right. I'm not actually too sure. Gaethalus, or Goidel-Glass, is the creator of the Gaelic language. They were exiled from Egypt following religious strife. That sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? I don't mean to poke holes in the story before it's even begun. Sorry, let me continue just telling you the story. With 1,000 followers, they set sail first to Spain. Scota and her husband then had a son called Hyber, who lends his name to Iberia. If you're familiar with the Iberian Peninsula, that's how it apparently got its name, because of their son, Hyber. And then they decided, no, Spain's not for us. It's not that nice here. The weather's not too good. Let's go to Ireland instead. So then they moved up to Ireland, where they set up the Kingdom of Hibernia, again named after Hyber, and also then leading us down to Hibs. But this whole journey took 440 years for them to get from Egypt to Spain to Ireland, because they were taking their time, alright? So Scota and her immediate family were long dead, but the people who did this incredibly long journey called themselves Scoti in her honour. Are you seeing where I'm going with this? In 330 BC, apparently, Fergus I of Scotland decided to make the jump from Ireland to Scotland. And he claimed to be a direct descendant of Scota and Goidel-Glass and Hyber himself. That's why he was the one making the journey. And thus, Scotland was founded in Queen Scota's name 440 odd years after she died, or she started her journey. And up and until the 13th century, Scottish kings, they claimed to be direct descendants of Scota and her bloodline. The Scotichronicon chronicles such kings. Now, if we're looking at this through a modern historical archaeological lens, right? We don't know anything about that. We have no evidence about that at all. One could argue that this first king, Fergus I of Scotland, you could argue that he's Fergus Mór MacCairc, Fergus the Great. But he was much, much later in time. He wasn't in the BCs, he was at like 400 AD, if we're right about our timings. And he ruled when the sort of upper east coast of Ireland and the west coast of Scotland was one united kingdom of Dalriata. So same name, different Fergus. Very, very easy for medieval people to get confused, or to try and spin it to sort of give themselves this biblical narrative to sort of up their significance. But we'll get into a bit more of that later on. Keep that thought in your head though, right? We'll come back to that later. But it's a classic case of the further back you go, the less we tend to know. Bars, hello, who's that? And because of that modern sort of analysis of this biblical Egyptian story, it's pretty much inconclusive. There is a book out there which I would love to get my hands on by Ralph Ellis that claims, he claims that Scota was actually Ankhesenamun, daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, and wife of King Tut. Talk about name dropping bloody 101. Galethius, or Goidel-Glass, whatever you want to call him, was actually a pharaoh called Ai, and that's just poetic. I would love for that to be true. I feel like I shouldn't have to explain this, but Ai in Scotland means yes. Sorry if that was dead condescending, but I didn't ken who's watching. Some of yous may not know a goddamn thing. And the story of Ankhesenamun was first written in the 8th century AD by a chronicler called Nennius. Maybe they've changed the names and the dates for some pizzazz, or again for their sort of significance in the Bible. I don't know. I didn't write it. So it's a very strenuous idea at best, but it's a bit fun, isn't it? Isn't it funny to think that the Scottish people are descendants of ancient... Gives a new meaning to I would walk 500 miles, doesn't it, guys? It's a Proclaimers joke. And it's not that funny. If I just came up with it now. Sorry for laughing. And I nearly forgot to mention, oh my god, probably one of the main aspects of this story that I was about to just completely move on from and forget about. Scota and her squad lugged a massive sandstone block with them, right? All the way from Egypt to Scotland. Why? It's better known as the Stone of Destiny, or Jacob's pillow, to rest his weary head, where Jacob is supposed to have rested and had his dream of the angels. I'm not a religious person. I've not read the Bible. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about here. And seated on which nearly all monarchs of Scotland have been crowned, including, recently, Big Charlie. Now, I will respect the Stone of Destiny with its own video in due course. And it's in Edinburgh Castle, so I can go up the road and actually take my own photos and that of it, but I can't be bothered doing that for a 30-second segment in this video today. So, in the meantime, head over, I'll pop it in this corner, that corner, I can't remember what corner it goes in. Go and watch Bruce talk about it now. You can trust him. He's a good colleague. I've met him once. He doesn't know who I am. But go and watch Bruce. He does a very good video on it. Now, I don't know if this bit deserves a separate title card, but I think it's really cool, and it's going to get one because it's my video, not yours. Okay, it's my video. I can give title cards to what I want. The Scotichronicon, in amongst a bunch of other stories that it also talks about, contains one of the earliest known mentions of Robin Hood. In this, R. Walter describes him as a 12th century cutthroat who was celebrated in ballads by the common people, wearing his iconic little green suit and stealing from the rich to give to the poor, baby. Classic. He's not changed a bit. Walter Bauer also says that Robin Hood was a creation of bards who were serving the lower classes, and that it was more of a common folks thing, and that the aristocracy didn't have a clue. It was their little thing that they all shared, and they kept the rich folks away from. And that makes sense, because rich people would not like Robin Hood, because he's stealing from them. You know what I mean? Therefore, the story of Robin Hood is ages old, because by the time Walter Bauer was writing about it, it's already an incredibly well-established story worth writing down in a book about the history of Scotland. Like, it's a big deal, and he's a well-known guy. And the story is older than the Scotichronicon itself because it was included in the Scotichronicon, which is already incredibly old. See why it's cool? Things are old. I love it. I think what really makes it cool as well, though, is that oftentimes people forget how old stories like Robin Hood and other sort of fairy tales are because they've been Disneyfied. No shade to Disney. These stories and fairy tales, they've all been Disneyified, but they weren't originally created by Disney. Disney's just made them sort of safe for children to watch and given them a sort of international platform to be seen on, which I think is really cool. The Scotichronicon also does mention various King Arthurian myths. That's been well covered by bloody everybody at this point. Who cares? Joking, I'll maybe do a separate thing on that at some point. But for right now, Robin Hood, Robin Hood. I genuinely think I'm so funny all of the time. And you lot better all agree.
Scotland forever!
The Scotichronicon was written by a Scottish person in a time where there was a very, very strong sense of Scottish identity newly forming. The Scotichronicon is a chronicle of Scotland's history, kings, myths, legends, biblical bits, and actual history, including the Scottish Wars for Independence. Yup! From 1296 to 1328, and then again from 1332 to 1357. If you're unfamiliar with Scottish Wars of Independence. For those who don't know, without me going into the actual ins and outs of these wars, because Jesus Christ, I will be here forever. Scotland fighting and wanting their own independence against England, who wanted to continually rule over them. I'm not getting any more into it than that. Jesus Christ. Maybe another video for another time. Not today. From the word choice in the Scotichronicon and the bits that I could find available online to read of it, Walter Bauer was a nationalist through and through, baby. He chronicles the wars. As a good historian would do, he does actually recount the events of the Wars of Independence. But you can tell there's a very, very strong anti-English sentiment mixed in there. For example, he has a go at Edward I of England, Edward Longshanks, Hammer of the Scots. He basically blames Edward and his frequent military incursions into Scotland for the loss and the destruction of a lot of Scottish written literature, which is partly the reason why the Laird of Rosyth asked Walter to write his Scotichronicon in the first place, because everything else was destroyed or being destroyed or was lost, and he was recounting the history to try and keep it safe. On top of that, by the way, it also contains a transcription of the Declaration of Arbroath, the letter written to the Pope, trying to get the Pope on side for independence. Bringing it back now to the founding myth of Scotland, because I find it so great. It was very, very common in this sort of medieval time, and kind of before, for various nations and groups of people in general to yoink and twist biblical narratives to try and make themselves seem more important in the grander scheme of religion, of Christianity. But because it's us, because it's Scotland, because we're a wee bit extra sometimes, there's an even deeper anti-English sort of sentiment to the myth of Scota and her people. Another document exists called Historia Regum Briganti, which is a history of British kings. But it basically tells the story of Brutus of Troy. I can't keep a straight face. Brutus of Troy, son of Aeneas, who was the cousin of King Priam of Troy, father of Hector and Paris. We're linking back to the Trojan War now, are you serious? Brutus of Troy left Troy with his Britons and made his way all the way to Britain and founded New Troy on the banks of the Thames. Any guesses as to what city that is now? London. Londinium. I have sailed the world, behold its wonders. London! So it's a very similar vibe to what Scota and her pals have done, except for on a sort of wider British scale rather than Scota just going, Ireland and Scotland, these are my bits, I like my bits, these are my two wee bits, okay? But then in the Scotichronicon, it's also been confirmed that to sort of separate themselves further from this idea of Brutus and his Britons, and to create this new separated Scottish identity even further and deeper into time and space. In the Scotichronicon it says that Scota and that beat Brutus to it. They arrived in Scotland and in Ireland first, before he even set foot into bloody Cornwall, right down in the south. Therefore, in sort of terms of who's better, Scota and the Scottish people were older. They got there first, they were better established first. Brutus and his Britons were too slow. Losers, speed up next time, too goddamn slow. I'm having far too much fun with this one, because it's so nonsensical. But in a way that's like, if that was true, it would slay. So in the Scotichronicon, amongst other things, we have included the Legend of Scota, the Wars of Independence, and the Declaration of Arbroath. 3 key iconic pieces of Scottish history directly tying to Scottish identity and separation from the English, published at a time post-Wars of Independence, where a lot of anti-English sentiment was floating about, and there was a lot of consolidation of these independence ideals. A new landscape and a new identity was sort of forming around this anti-English vibe and this post-war resentment, all of which are not only reflected by the Scotichronicon, but then amplified by it as well. But there are also a lot of other things inside the Scotichronicon which I urge you to read if you can get a copy. The Scotichronicon was written in a very post-war, where I think everybody was a little bit sore and butthurt and angry, which is why there is so much sort of anti-English, pro-independence, very Scottish nationalist ideas coming out in the actual text. There you go. What about today? Why do you care so much? Who cares about this? The Scotichronicon is the most important piece of medieval Scottish literature surviving today, arguably. Bauer not only chronicles his history, but he also likes to chuck in wee moral lessons here and there for individuals reading it, but also on a sort of national scale of what we can do better and what lessons we can learn from history as a society and as a nation and all that. He also has a wee funny bone about him. He likes to chuck in wee jokes. Little medieval priesty jokes. Given his academic background, he utilises that actually really well, and he draws on a lot of historical sources that some wouldn't even be known to us if he didn't reference them or give them a wee mention here or there. But of course, no historical source is without bias, especially one from medieval times. So there's obviously a lot of Christian messages in there. There's a strong sense of national identity within the pages that directly reflects the post-war society that Bauer was living in at the time. He clearly felt those feelings too. He's still a priest, he's an abbot of Inchcolm Abbey, so there's also this religious lens that he's viewing the history through, and that will influence his opinions and the facts that he puts into it. But as I said at the beginning, a lot of modern historians aren't keen on Walter Bauer as the author of this text. Of course, he's not written it like a modern historian would, because the modern idea of chronicling history didn't exist back then. But a lot of modern historians do prefer John of Fordun and his earlier chronicle, despite it cutting off a lot earlier because the guy died. And from what I've gathered in my research, they're often compared together as a sort of John versus Walter vibe, despite their works actually being more of a continuation of each other. Like, you can view the two works separately, yes, but also Walter's work was based on John's and then continued John's work, but they're being more viewed as competitors in a lot of senses, which I find really weird. Walter's not arguing anything new, he's just extending it because John is dead. John can't report on events that he wasn't there for, you know what I mean? Despite that, the Scotichronicon is still incredibly important, incredibly old, incredibly significant to our history as Scottish people. I mean, yeah, it's not the most accurate, but who can say that they have a bloody medieval document in their country's history that is actually word for word factually correct? I don't think anyone can. I don't think there's a single nation in the world that could say that word for word it's exactly accurate. I shouldn't be allowed to get philosophical over things. I really shouldn't, because I really do start to ramble, and I'm sorry. It's where my brain starts to just go, and I like to put my ideas out there, and then you can tell me your ideas in return. That's how it works. So the Scottish independence debate has gone on for quite a while now, and that's a very clear thing. It's been going on since the bloody Wars of Independence in the medieval times, and that's all I'm going to say about it, right? Because I don't want people to argue in my comment section about independence. I'm still just astounded that I wasn't taught this in school. Don't get me wrong, I loved history at school. I mean, hello, look at me. But I don't really know why I wasn't taught this at school. This seems like a pretty big deal. I wasn't taught anything about the Scotichronicon or even like the islands in the Forth, which I'm now doing on YouTube with you. I was taught about Scottish Wars of Independence, but it was a very fleeting, small part. I did history till higher level, and it was a very teeny tiny bit of what we actually learned. Was it just my school that did that? Did all Scottish schools do the same thing? Was it just my year group maybe, or my class? Maybe I was just off sick that day on the one day they decided to mention it. So maybe it's just me. I am the drama. And there's a lot of people out there that seem to not really know about this. You'd think they'd make a bigger deal out of this document. Fair enough, it's not that accurate, but it's still a very important and cool document to study. Being based in the city of Edinburgh, where the Firth of Forth is right next to us, really. Not doxing myself. The whole city's next to the water. It's such an iconic document that was written so nearby. Really, I mean, if you can swim that far. Close by history. I wasn't taught of it. But I was taught about a lot of things from a lot further away that were a lot less important in my eyes. But that's just my opinion on the topics that the SQA pick for high school history, I guess. That's not a rant for YouTube. YouTube doesn't care about higher history in 2017. But let me know in the comments what you think about the Scotichronicon. Do you think it's worth studying? Did history teachers just look at it and go, nah, it's not worth it? If you would like further videos on any of the aspects that I've spoke about in here, whether it's Brutus of Troy, or going more into the biblical myth, or more into the Scottish Wars of Independence, Jesus Christ, that would be torture. Please just let me know in the comments. If you like this video, leave a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, shut up. Go watch something else then. Don't forget to subscribe. I post new videos every Tuesday/Wednesday. Ring the bell if you want to as well, if you want some notifications. If you didn't, that's fine. Hit subscribe anyway. You can also hop in the Discord if you want to ask any questions in there. I'm also live on Twitch twice, sometimes 3 times a week if you're lucky. Usually twice if you want to go and follow me live over there. We do talk history and archaeology a lot over there too, but there's also just some fun games and silly little doodads like that chucked in, okay? Tatty bye. And I'll see you next Tuesday.